Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Thursday in a slightly less rainy Vancouver than it was yesterday. A little bit.
Like storm today?
Is there supposed to be a storm?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that later in the day?
I don't.
Oh, okay. Exciting. Like with thunder and lightning?
Well, the app says so.
Okay. Well, if the app says, then it must be true, right?
Entirely.
What's that?
It's not entirely true.
It's not.
Sometimes they predict wrong.
So it's true. Sometimes they are wrong. Although weather prediction is pretty. You have to admit it's pretty good, right?
But I've never seen a lightning in Vancouver.
No?
No.
We just had some.
It did, like since the summer actually.
Yeah. When was that?
It was only one day, right?
Yeah. a couple
Yeah.
days.
It was really.
It was like my first time. I was like, whoa, what happened?
Yeah.
It was.
Because Vancouver never has like lightning. They only have like rain
Yeah.
and wind.
Yeah. Things. Yeah. We don't get a lot of thunderstorms here or lightning or. It was pretty cool. That was. But that was. Was it like mid-August or late August?
Yeah.
Do you remember the lightning? Yeah.
I'm torn to
I know. It's who knows what the time is like, right? Okay, so here we go. So Amy is here. Good morning, Amy. Daniel is here. Good morning to you, Daniel. Claire is here. Hello to you. Vicky is here. Good morning, Vicky. And Gabrielle is here. And I'm gonna guess that that's Zion, but I'm not sure because I can't read that. But I'm gonna make a guess. Good morning, if that's you. So before we start, I think we should do and Kennan's here too. Good morning. Good morning. Before we get started, I think we should do a little quiz next week. I'm thinking maybe on Tuesday. Vera's looking at me like she might look at a squished worm on the sidewalk. But yeah, we'll have a little quiz. I'll post some more details in Microsoft Teams maybe a little bit later today. But what it'll look like, I'm kind of testing this in my history class. What it'll look like is that you guys who are regularly attending class will just write a short paper quiz. It'll be 3 to 5 questions. It'll be fairly simple. If you are online, I will do a video conference with you and I'll just ask you a couple of questions and you'll tell me what you know orally with, you'll explain to me. So there'll be a slightly different setup depending on if you're in class or if you're somewhere else. But either way, we'll be able to do it. But maybe on Tuesday we'll do that, and I'll post some more details in Microsoft Teams so that you can have them. But I just thought I would say it so that you are all fairly warned. Okay. Okay, that is Zion. Okay. Hello. Here we go. So as of yesterday, we started talking about oppression and power, right? And so I introduced you to this by talking about the idea of binary oppositions. And I'll kind of point these things out to you again and again. And I use the map here of the North Shore High School as a bit of a way into it, right? So this was obviously in Mean Girls. Janice gave this to Katie and said, here's all the sort of cliques and groups, social groups that you need to know. And I said that often society organizes things into simple opposites, okay? Like men and women, boys and girls, up and down, black and white, Democrat and Republican, gay or straight, all sorts of things. And society kind of does this because on the whole, society is lazy, okay? And so we create these kind of two boxes. Usually they're at either end of a spectrum, and we say that you're either this or that. Which box do you fit into? Which category do you fit into? And the simple truth of it is that these little boxes are imaginary, okay? They're socially constructed just like a lot of our knowledge and values and social norms. And many people actually don't fit into those boxes very well. There's a spectrum of variation in between, okay? And so even though it's tempting to think of things in sort of black and white terms, most things aren't so simple. And certainly with humans, things are almost always far more complicated than that. But in this case, I introduced you to them to say that we often sort of create these imaginary groups and define ourselves by them, right? And so in the United States, for instance, we're really seeing a pretty strong polarization in terms of political affiliation, right? You're a Republican or a Democrat. And if you're a Republican, you're this way, and that means you're not a Democrat, because we all know the Democrats are, you know, evil and will destroy America, right? And of course, if you ask Democrats, then Republicans, if you're a Democrat, you're definitely not Republican, because the Republicans are evil and will destroy America. And so you're really seeing people heavily invest in those two boxes. But to be a Republican, in the past at least, meant a lot of different things, and people could have very different political and social views and maybe not categorize themselves strongly as Republican or strongly as Democrat. But as time has gone on, the US has become more and more polarized, and these two imaginary categories are becoming, people are really investing in the existence of them, and they're, almost, we almost have a civil war would be a very strong, statement here, but you almost have two sides that are battling each other because they're so invested in the group that they feel that they belong to. So just like Americans and Canadians, or men and women, or Republicans or Democrats, we often define ourselves, we often take a little bit of our identity based on the group that we belong to, right? So Canadians, we like to think of ourselves as kind of, friendly, polite people living up here in the north. We're kind of cool and relaxed, not like those Americans, right? Because we define ourselves by how we are, but we also define ourselves by what we're not, right? We're not those guys down there. We're not Americans, right? And similarly, if you're a man, you define yourself as a man and all the stuff that goes with that. But part of it is that, you're also not a woman, right? Because women are like this, and so you're a man. You're not like that, okay? And again, that's an oversimplification. It's not true. We'll get to it. I'm just giving you the example at the moment. And we kind of see this play out lots of times we see this play out in Mean Girls with some of the high school social groups, right? And so I can very easily ask you some binary oppositions, and we can easily define these groups according to them, right? So, are the plastics popular or not popular? They're popular, right? Are they guys or girls? They're all girls. Are they attractive or not attractive? Attractive, right? So we can very easily categorize these social groups based on binary oppositions. And that can happen when we start dealing with stereotypes and prejudices as well. So I just wanted to introduce it. And so we kind of moved on to oppression yesterday. And one of the things that we want to remember about oppression is that it's not the same as prejudice. Or did I say the one? Bleh. Okay, I'm going to start again. The one thing we want to remember about oppression is that it's not quite the same thing as discrimination or prejudice, okay? So they're connected, but oppression works at the level of society, okay? And so oppression has to do with the way that society is built and the way that it operates, okay? So you can think about us. You can think about members of society. We're all parts of a little machine, right? So right now there's the machine of Canadian society. It is running and functioning, and we're all little parts of the machine, right? And so that machine can operate in ways that advantage some people and disadvantage others. And so for Canada, we said yesterday that white people are the dominant group in Canada, and so the machine of Canada operates in such a way that it benefits white Canadians and disadvantages non-white Canadians. And so that's a little bit different from discrimination and prejudice, right? Because I can be a white person in Canada. We'll get to this a little bit later. I can be a white person in Canada. I can work very hard to not hold any prejudice against non-white people. I can work very hard not to discriminate against them. I can even work very hard to fight for social equality, right? To rectify inequality. But I'm still part of a machine that benefits me. Okay, so those two things can happen at the same time. And we'll dig into that later, but that's one of the things that you see, particularly in social media, you'll see people missing that fact because people have created two more categories at the moment, racist and anti-racist, right? You're one or the other. If you're not anti-racist, you must be racist. And again, those categories are oversimplified as well, and they're not true either. And so that's the problem with these binary opposites, is they simplify things to the point where you can't really understand the complexity of anything, right? They're oversimplifications, but I'm jumping ahead of myself. So oppression has to do with the way that society operates, the way that it's structured, its laws, its policies, the way we do things, right? Our social norms, our beliefs, our values, all of those can be created in a way that benefits the dominant group and disadvantages minoritized groups. And it will work this way for whichever kind of group you're dealing with, right? Whether you're dealing with, whether you're talking about race, whether you're talking about gender, whether you're talking about sexuality or economic class or religious affiliation or whatever it is, society is often built by the dominant group, and it's built in a way that benefits them and may disadvantage other people. Okay, so that's what we're talking about when we talk about oppression, is kind of the societal level patterns that advantage some and disadvantage others. And no one person has to do anything to make it happen. Okay, and so I can be here in Canada, I can be very for social equality, I can do my best not to be prejudicial or to discriminate, but I'm still part of that system at the same time, and I benefit from being part of it, even though I'm not doing anything even though I'm not necessarily doing anything racist or sexist or whatever. Right? Get it? Does that make sense? Almost? Yes? No? Maybe? We'll get it, don't worry. So oppression is kind of the relationship between the dominant group and the minoritized group. And so here I showed you this little chart here, and I mentioned, of course, that this chart will differ depending on where in the world you are, right? This is a chart that's kind of made up for Western countries, for Canada, for North America, because this is where white people are the dominant group, right? And so again, if we go to China, white people are not the dominant group in China. Chinese people are, right? So the groups will vary depending on where in the world that you are. Yeah, okay, I said all that stuff. And oh yeah, so yesterday we were reading this article, which I said wasn't very well written, but that's okay. We're still gonna get something out of it. And so I asked you all of these. Questions. Remind me what stereotypes are. What do we say about stereotypes?
To towards a person or a group on the basis of their physical characteristics.
Right. So it could be based on physical characteristics. So I see something with my eyes, right? And based on what I see, I think I know something about you, right? And so stereotypes tell us something about a group of people or an individual person based on something that I see, right? There were some different types of stereotypes. What did we say the different types were?
Individual.
Individual, how does that work? How do individual stereotypes work?
Like we look at someone and guess something about them.
Right, so we look at an individual person, and based on our stereotypes, we might infer something about them, right? What's the other type? Group, and how does that work?
We look at someone and guess the whole characteristics of the whole group.
Almost, you're close. With a group stereotype, you see that someone belongs to a certain social group, and because of your stereotypes about the group, yeah, you think you know something about them. So if you see, let's say you're on a university campus, right? You're just walking along and you look and you see some dude walking along with a fraternity shirt on, right? He's got the Greek lettering. So you don't know anything about that guy, but do you know something about frats?
He's a cool kid.
Well, yeah. So what do we know about frats? What do we know about frats?
They have the prestige.
Prestige and cool. They have big parties. What else? They're stupid, maybe. I agree with you, but I'm on camera. What else do we know about fraternities?
They usually art major or business major.
They're art or business majors, maybe. Are they girls or guys? Guys, right? So we see this guy walking along college campus with his fraternity t-shirt on with the 3 Greek letters, whatever they are, sigma, kappa, beta, or whatever. We see those 3 letters, we see that guy, and we're like, oh, I know what that guy's like, right? Because we have a stereotype about what fraternities are like, right? And we could be very right about that guy, and we could be very wrong about him, but still, the group he belongs to, we use our stereotypes and we think we know something about him, right? Whereas individual ones apply only to the individual, right? And so I think the one they mention in the article has to do with beauty, right? So we often think that beautiful people are nice and compassionate and, you know, they must be really smart and really cool, right? And they might be, right? And they also might be horrible people, but we can't really tell just by looking at them, but often good-looking people, we think they're nicer than maybe they are, right? So what's prejudice then?
Extreme stereotype.
An extreme stereotype, right? But that's, give me more than that.
When you decide whether you like someone or not based on their stereotype.
Right. So you have a stereotype about someone or something, and you attach a value judgment to it, right? And so yesterday I gave you the example of the dog, right? And so there's lots of stereotypes floating around about dogs, right? And so we said dogs are friendly, dogs are fun, dogs like to play, dogs are loyal and loving to their owners and their people. But we also had stereotypes about dogs are kind of dirty and messy, right? And sometimes they bark a lot, and sometimes they can be scary, and sometimes they can bite you. And so the stereotypes that you kind of call to mind are kind of based on your experience and your prejudices, right? So what do you see? What do you see when you look at this dog? Do you want that dog to come closer, or do you want that dog to stay away, right? Do you see a lovable, cuddly creature, or do you see a potentially frightening animal? And actually, I like this picture. This is a good one because this one could go either way, right? Yeah, he could be a big cuddle monster, or he could be actually very intimidating, depending on what that dog is actually like. So yeah, we have lots of stereotypes about dogs, but we also have prejudice too, right? And so some of us are positively prejudiced towards dogs, and some of us have a negative prejudice towards dogs based on mostly our socialization and also our personal experience, right? And so if you've dealt with a lot of aggressive, angry, barky dogs, you may not like them. If you grew up around dogs, or if you have a dog, you might love them, right? And so you have a positive prejudice. Let's go back here. Oh yeah, Jane Elliott's class. What happened in Jane Elliott's class?
You like it perform poorly.
Right, but why did they?
They say that the brown eyed students are more brighter.
So they did a little experiment in this classroom with small kids. Jane Elliott basically created a stereotype, right? She said that kids with brown eyes are smarter and better behaved and just better kids, and kids with blue eyes were less smart and, you know, more poorly behaved. Those are trouble. Those blue-eyed kids, they're trouble. And lo and behold, that actually starts to happen. The kids actually start to behave. They become a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? They start to fill the stereotype, even though the stereotype is ridiculous, right? There's no correlation between eye color and intelligence, and yet the data suggests it, right? If you look at Jane Elliott's grade book, you will see the data, you'll see the proof, but the proof is not biological, it is a social construct. Yeah, and so the students start acting out their stereotypes, and the kids with the brown eyes start acting in a prejudicial manner toward the kids with the blue eyes, right? They start looking down on them and maybe making fun of them and things like that, which is really not fair to kids with blue eyes, right? And so, very interesting experiment, right? So we said that this tells us that prejudice is, that people will sometimes act out that prejudice, and sometimes they'll even act it out if it disadvantages them, right? So the brown-eyed kids, you could very easily understand them acting this out, right? Because it says they're better, right? They're smarter and they're better. So of course they're like, yeah, we are better. But it's not in the blue-eyed kid's best interest to act out this stereotype. But for some reason, they seem to do it anyway, right? Which is very interesting. We'll talk about that a little later and we'll give it a fancy name, but I just want to introduce it now. Stereotypes, why do they remain so stable over time? Right, so our brain, do you remember what I called that yesterday? Yeah, confirmation bias. So our brains seem to work in such a way that we remember information that confirms, we better remember information that confirms what we already believe. And things that contradict what we believe, we tend to ignore it or forget it or whatever, right? So again, back to our friend the dog. When you look at a dog like this, or even when I ask you to think about a dog, or even when I say the word dog, immediately what comes to mind is all of the times you can remember interacting with dogs in a way that confirms what you already believe, right? And so I think dogs are great. I love them. I think they're fantastic creatures. And so when you ask me to think about dogs, immediately what comes to mind is friendly, happy dogs, right? Ones that are licking your face and, you know, you're scratching their ears and, you know, they're fun, happy dogs. That's what comes to my mind. But for someone who's had negative experiences with dogs, when I say think about dogs, they think about scary ones, right? Ones that are, you know, barking at them or biting them or aggressive. So it really depends on your experience. But again, we tend to remember things that confirm what we already believe, right? And so confirmation bias is something we have to be sort of cognizant of because we all do it. It's just an artifact of the way the human brain operates. But there's another reason too, I think, at least one other reason. Why stereotypes remain stable over time?
We said that it's hard to be shaken because they've told,
Because they,
like they are, I don't know, 100 years old, we said.
okay. Yeah, so many of them have been around for quite some time and they're sort of passed down from generation to generation. They kind of become part of the socialization process, right? And so, again, I said this stereotype about Jewish people being rich or being good with money or being concerned about money, that's a stereotype that has been around for hundreds of years. It's literally hundreds of years old. And so that actually demonstrates how stable these things can be. There was something about an exception and a rule thing too. Do you remember that?
Is it like once you, like example, you see someone that's Jewish but they're not rich and you're kind of just like, you don't really care about it because it doesn't look like.
In part. In the article, they talk about Germans being efficient, that sort of idea or that sort of stereotype. And so they say that, in the article, they say that, do people believe that if there's a stereotype of Germans being efficient, which I think there is, do you believe that every single German is efficient? No, right? And so because nobody really believes that 100% of German people are efficient, when you meet one that isn't, you're like, oh, well, that's the exception. Because of course not everyone is, right? Not everyone is like that. So even when you encounter somebody who might challenge your stereotype, you can very easily write them off and say, oh, well, they're just an exception to the rule, right? And so you create a rule, but the rule has a bit of a loophole in it. And so you can, you don't have to reevaluate your stereotype when you meet this German person who's inefficient, because you know that not every German is efficient anyway. So your stereotype remains unchallenged, right? Because you've got a little loophole there, right? Okay, this one we didn't talk about yesterday, the 4 functions of prejudice. Now, I'll introduce this by saying this is a sociological thing, and it is a functionalist perspective, okay? So sociologists who are using functionalism, this theory of functionalism, the idea is that everything in society has a function, okay? It somehow allows society to operate. And so the idea here is if something didn't have a function, it wouldn't exist, okay? And so this is how they're coming at it with prejudice. So as the sociologists are looking at prejudice and saying, prejudice must have a function in society, otherwise it wouldn't exist. And so they're not necessarily saying that it's good or that it's good for all people, but they're saying that it does something, right? It's a part of the machine that allows it to work. Okay, that's the way they're coming at it here. So one of the functions.
Knowledge.
Okay, and so what do they say about the knowledge function?
I think it was about the experience that we say, like, we see someone in the situation that we've been before, so we've experienced that, so we think that they feel the same things or they do the same thing we do.
Yeah, so the knowledge function comes from humans' desire to understand the world, right? And understand how it works and understand who people are and why they do what they do, right? These are things that humans want to know. One of the things that makes us unique is we want to give meaning to our experiences, right? We want to understand the world that we live in. And so stereotypes help us to gain knowledge about the world and organize it, right? Into some sort of pattern, right? We sort of create categories for people. What's the second one?
Justice.
Okay, what's adjustive about? The adjustive function. I think I remember that, but I'm going to call it up just so I can remember the example they use. How did the adjustive function work? Ah, yes. Ah, okay. All right. What's adjustive function?
We adjust
Right. Yeah. Yeah, this has to do with kind of social norms and social values, right? So our society has certain ways of thinking and believing and social norms of behavior, and we try to get everyone to follow those rules. We already talked about that. We saw that happen on Seinfeld, right? So we are constantly in the process of learning how to say the right things, and when we say the right things and when we act appropriately, we get rewarded for them, right? And if we say the wrong things or if we behave incorrectly, we get punished for it, right? And so we're in this process of kind of adjusting and learning how to be a member of society and cooperate with others, right? So this adjustive function has to do with kind of rewards and punishments for saying and doing the appropriate thing, or at least what society says is appropriate. What's the third one? Okay, what does that mean? Value expressive.
And determine who we are, so the thoughts we have, they get stable somehow.
Yeah, part of our identity has to do with the things that we believe and that we value. And so when we say something, we're expressing a little bit of who we are to the world, right? And so if you say, for instance, you know, I don't feel that I am, but just as an example, I am an LGBTQ ally, right? And I believe in, you know, equality for people, you know, for people of all genders and sexualities, okay? In saying that, I am communicating a bit of my identity to the world, right? I'm saying who I am and kind of affirming who I am to myself, right? So we express our values to the world, and in doing so, we kind of confirm who we are. Does that make sense? A little bit? Okay, last one.
Ego defensive function.
Right, what is that?
It give us like the feeling of superiority over the discriminated group.
Right. So we might feel that we are better than other people in some ways, right? And so we can make ourselves feel better by looking at other people and judging them, right? And this doesn't sound like a nice thing to do, but come on, who's done this? Maybe not not in a racist way, but I mean, who has done this? Everyone has done this, right? You've looked at someone else and you're like, oh, I'm cooler than them, right? And it makes you feel better, right? Does it not? It probably shouldn't. You know, it's probably not a useful way to, you know, gain self-esteem. But I think we have all done this, right? We have looked at other people and we're like, oh, I'm smarter or cooler or better dressed or, you know, more attractive or whatever than them, right? So we make ourselves feel better that way sometimes. Not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's useful, but I think we've all probably done that. And so a sociologist would say it's another function of prejudice, right? To make ourselves feel good by, you know, thinking prejudicial thoughts against other people, right? Again, not saying it's good or bad, it's just something that people tend to do. Ooh boy, what's this one about? Tajfel's social identity theory. What is this about? Huh? Number 6.
The need for social identity supports the formation of prejudice.
The need for social identity supports prejudice. Okay, help me out with that. How does that work?
I don't know.
That's okay. That's okay. Let's figure out what it means.
Right, okay, so that theory like help a person maintain a positive image.
Okay, so the social group you belong to is part of your self-image. Let's use the plastics for an example. Okay, so we said Gretchen was a member of the plastics, and being a plastic, being part of that group was a part of her identity. It was a part of who she was. Vera, what were you going to say?
It's basically, it works because we have to categorize people into groups, which is stereotyping, creating stereotypes, because we also need them, because that's how we identify ourselves.
Right. So prejudice works to kind of organize our social groupings and social identities, right? So Gretchen, for instance, is part of the plastics. Part of her identity is being part of that group. So how does she want to see that group? As good or bad? She wants to see that group as good because she's a member of it and it's part of her identity. And we all want to be members of the winning team, right? We all want to be members of a group that we can be proud of. And so Gretchen is very proud of that group. And in part, it is in her best interest to be proud of it because it's part of her identity, right? And that's probably what's going on when they have that rule where you can't buy any clothes without the girl's approval, because the self-image of the group is so important, right? And so if the Plastics are the best dressed, most stylish girls in the high school, and you're a member of that group, that's really good, right? That makes you feel good. And so that group kind of looks down on other groups because it allows them to feel good about their group, and that allows them to feel good about themselves. That make sense? Sort of. Canadians do this as well, right? And so, do I like being Canadian? Yes, I do. Am I proud of the country that we have here? I am. Is it a perfect country? No. We have stuff we need to fix. But as countries go, I think we live in a pretty good one, and I'm proud of it. But often, us Canadians like to compare ourselves to the Americans, right? Because the Americans are, there's lots of stereotypes around the Americans. Some of them are more true than others. But by looking at the Americans and kind of rolling our eyes at them a little bit, we get to feel good about ourselves, right? We get to reinforce our positive identity as Canadians, and I get to feel a little better about myself as a Canadian. Yes, ma'am.
How is that different from the people?
It's not. It's actually very connected, I would say. So it's connected to self-esteem, and it's connected to your social identity. And so I think those are two kind of different ways of, it's looking at the same thing from two opposing things. Either you're trying to defend your ego and keep yourself from feeling bad, or you're actually trying to make yourself feel good. Either way, those things are kind of, I think they're different ways of describing the exact same thing, I would say. That's a good catch, though. Different ways of describing the same thing. Okay, and some potential solutions to reduce prejudice, which of course is the important question. How do we fix this, or can we fix this? How do we work to minimize prejudice? Daniel.
I think you can reduce the prejudice by increase the connection with people from other social groups.
Mhm.
Like when you talk with them, you can more understand about them. And your stereotype can be decreased, I think.
Right. So prejudice can be decreased by getting people connected with people who are different from them, or people who are, or whom they might hold prejudices about, right? And we'll see this in a couple of instances. But now that we're talking about this, I've never asked this, but I do want to ask it. How many of you, because you've all come from different countries, maybe not last month, but in the past, how many of you came to Canada and encountered either Canadians or members of other cultures or ethnicities or sexualities or genders within Canada, and those interactions challenged your stereotypes? You thought this group of people was like this, but then you saw something and you're like, oh, maybe not. Did anyone experience that? Yes, no? No? We're exactly like you thought we were? Okay. Well, it's truth in advertising, right? Sala, you were nodding. Do you want to? You don't have to, but do you want to share with us? No? Okay, that's all right. I understand that.
Canadians are super nice and polite, and the first week I came here, and there were two white people shouting across the street at each other. I was like, what?
Yeah. So clearly not all of us are so nice and friendly, right? Some of us are, and some of us are, we have our share of jerks here. Or maybe they were just having a bad day. It's possible. But yeah, having people it's kind of exposure therapy, right? Having people exposed to different groups of people who they might have prejudices or stereotypes about, can help to alleviate or reduce those prejudices, right? And so, you know, maybe I don't want to, you know, so the dog, right? And so if you have negative prejudices against the dog, you know, if you had the more experiences, the more positive experiences you have around dogs, particularly in Canada, for instance, you will probably see that, oh, they're actually, for the most part, they're nice, cuddly creatures, right? There's always a few that are not trained or socialized very well, and they can be aggressive. But, you know, you could have your prejudicial ideas changed by being exposed to happy, cuddly, furry dogs, right? Other ways in which prejudice can be reduced. Yeah, Salah.
When you see someone that is doing something that they shouldn't be doing, not to judge their group, not like
Right. So being aware of those group stereotypes, right? And so the idea that, you know, you can't simply judge someone by one thing or one action, right? So just because two Canadians are shouting at each other across the street doesn't, of course, mean that all Canadians would do such a thing, right? There are probably Americans here on vacation.
I like how you're trying to, you know, just to make sure that she doesn't have a bad image.
No. I'm teasing Americans. We're just having some fun with you. Don't freak out. Don't fill my comments section with ugly stuff. Nobody's watching this anyway. I do want you to have a positive image of us, because that's the other thing, is that Canadians are, you know, thought of as nice and friendly, and we actually like that image. We want people to have that image of us. So yeah, we would probably, you know, if Avera saw two angry Canadians, we'd probably want to say, oh, most of us are nice, even though sometimes we get angry, particularly when the hockey team loses, but that's another story. Other solutions to reduce prejudice, Anna?
Decrease competition between two groups.
Right, and what do they talk about in the article in terms of decreasing competition between two groups?
This is a non-contact.
Well, certainly prejudices are allowed to persist and maybe even get worse when you separate people out, right? So if you have prejudices against gay people, for instance, and you have never met a gay person, there's really no way for your prejudice to be reduced or challenged, right? So the more segregated and separated people are, the less likely it is that their prejudices will be challenged, right? And so if you don't like dogs, for instance, and you never interact with dogs at all, is your prejudice likely to change? No, you're just going to hold on to it because you know that dogs are mean and aggressive, right? So contact is definitely good. Sorry, Anna, what did you say a minute ago? I lost it. The competition thing. So what happens in the article? They give us an example of the Robbers Cave experiment. Do you remember that? What's that? Yeah, they did an experiment. It was with kind of like Boy Scout, or summer camp, boys' summer camp. So what did they do?
In and out groups, they separated into two groups.
Yeah, so they took all these summer campers, these boys at a summer camp, they separated them into two groups. It's like the Eagles and I don't know, it doesn't say. The Eagles and the Lions or something is what it was. And so the Eagle group was together and the Lion group was together, and then they had to compete for prizes. And so, of course, very quickly, the Eagles all started to hate the Lions, and the Lions all started to hate the Eagles, even though before they came to camp, some boys were already friends, and their friends were on the opposite team. Even so, they started to hate the other team until they switched it up, and they had competitions where the teams actually had to work together in order to be rewarded. And so after that, the Lions and the Eagles started to hate each other less, right? So prejudice between different groups can be overcome if you can get them to work together towards a common goal, right? So contact is good. segregation or separation is bad. Having people in contact where the existing hierarchy isn't maintained. So, if you're at a country club, a fancy golf country club or something like that, and there's a bunch of white people in there, and all of the kitchen staff and serving staff are all black people. Well, yeah, that's contact, but you're just reinforcing the power differential that already exists. So that doesn't count, right? You need to have people mixing in an equal way or cooperating in a way that they both benefit, right?
It doesn't always work.
Um,
It's like some people don't get along and they have to work together for like a project or something, but like they end up being that.
The exposure definitely does. I don't think I'll talk about this in this class because it's part of a video that I used for another class. But has anyone ever seen the show or heard of the show Will and Grace? Will and Grace? Yeah. So Will and Grace was a sitcom, a comedy show that was on TV. What is it? 2020, maybe 20 years ago or so, or 15 years ago. Maybe less, I don't know the dates. But Will and Grace was centered on Will, who was gay, and his friend Grace, who was not. And there was another gay character on there too, Jack, who's so funny. So there was two gay characters, and both characters were very likable. Will's a really nice guy. Jack is a really nice guy and super funny. And the show was actually very popular with American viewers. And what's interesting is as the show became more popular, if you check out the polls in terms of people's attitudes toward homosexuality, people actually became more accepting of homosexuality as this show continued to run on TV, to the point where they actually call it the Will and Grace effect. And so when people are exposed to, let's say, these two gay men on television, and of course they're both very likable and funny and it's an enjoyable show to watch, their attitudes actually shift. People become more accepting of homosexuality and homosexual relationships on television. And so that's the exposure right there. And so it doesn't even have to happen in person. You don't even have to meet real people. You can actually see them on TV, and people's stereotypes and prejudices will shift, which is pretty amazing. It is a good show, though. I recommend it. It's
I watch a few like first.
yeah. Will and Grace are funny, and then the other two. So Jack is a gay man, and then there's a Karen, and Karen works.
She's the one that's like married a rich guy.
I think so, and I think she's Grace's boss or something like that,
Yeah.
or they work at the
And
same
they
place.
work together, and then Grace is divorced with the
Right. Yeah, so Will and Grace are funny. Jack and Karen are hilarious together. They're so good. But anyway, that's another. This is not television 101, so we don't need to go there. Okay, so that's good for now. Do you want to take a little break? Break time? Okay, let's take 10, come back, and we'll keep going here, okay? That's good so far. Okay. And we're back. And we're back. Okay, here's where we are. Let me go here. So we've been talking about stereotypes and prejudice and discrimination and some sociological theories, and we said that stereotypes are reduced or simplified characteristics of a group, right? And so sometimes they're characteristics that we attribute to a group, and so we might imagine all dogs to be friendly. We might imagine elementary school teachers to be sort of kind and caring and nurturing. And so sometimes we infer things about individual people based on what they're like, and sometimes we infer things about people based on the group that they belong to. So the frat guy, for instance, we might see him walking across campus and we might think that we know something about him, right? Sometimes stereotypes are created based on things that stand out, okay? So there's a stereotype that Canadians say "a" at the end of all of our sentences, "a." So we talk like this, "a," and we, you know, every time we come to an end of a sentence, we always end it with "a," eh? So that's not true. What's that?
Do you do that?
I don't know, do I?
I don't think you do.
I don't think I do either.
You sound pretty American, to be honest.
No, that's definitely a Canadian, like a stereotypical Canadian accent, eh? So
Mr. Keith sounds Canadian.
does he sound Canadian? I don't know. I don't know if he sounds Canadian. He sounds like Mr. Keith to me. I'm not.
Sometimes he does a.
Does he say A?
Sometimes.
It's definitely a Canadian stereotype, and it's something that stands out. So we do have this stereotype circulating that Canadians say A, and so when people parody Canadians, often they'll have us saying A, or they'll have us talking in that kind of,
It's also our known for lumberjacks or something like that.
yeah, lumberjacks and stuff like that, right? We're all riding. We're all riding bears to work and stuff like that. The lumberjack thing, well, we have a pretty big forestry industry here in Canada, so I think the lumberjack thing comes from that. Yeah, but stereotypes often have no positive or negative value attached to them, because that's where we get into prejudice. And again, there's a bit of gray area between the two, but you know, if we look at the stereotype of Canadians saying A, that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. Nobody's making a judgment about that. It's just, you know, something that you think you know about Canadians, which sometimes is very true for some people and sometimes is very not. And like you pointed out, I don't really use A very much. But we said prejudice is different. So prejudice is kind of a learned judgment of people based on the stereotypes that you have. And so you see people, or you see a group of people, based on what you see, you interpret things about them, and then you make judgments, right? And so we said they can be positive or negative depending on the stereotype they're based on, or depending on the individual person. And so, again, we can say that the dog, you know, there's lots of positive and negative stereotypes floating around about the dog, and you could be positively prejudiced towards dogs, or you could be negatively prejudiced towards dogs, depending on the stereotypes that you hold and your past experience, right? And so based on those, you can discriminate, right? And so discrimination is where we act, or when we don't act, when we don't do something that we should, based on our prejudices. And so again, I use the example of the dog. If I have a positive prejudice against the dog or towards the dog, I might discriminate positively. And so my friend calls me and I'm like, yeah, come on over on Saturday and definitely bring your dog, right? Because I love the dog. Or I might be negatively prejudiced toward the dog and say, hey, you can come over, but yeah, leave that, you know, scroungy mud at home. I don't want to see it, right? So depending on my prejudices, I might positively discriminate, yeah, bring the dog, or I might negatively discriminate and say, leave it at home, right? Oh, and the last thing is that discrimination can occur intentionally or unintentionally. So this is an important thing too, and I'll show you this in a few minutes. The idea that we can discriminate against people on purpose, but we can also do it by accident. We can also do it without really realizing that we're doing it, okay? And so in a minute, I'll show you, this is where that idea of social messages being like kind of computer viruses, and they get absorbed into your programming and you don't really know they're there, and they influence your behavior. This is where that comes in, where you can discriminate without even really knowing that you did, which gets tricky. Right, so there's our dog that we've seen a bunch of times. Prejudice comes into play when we place value on our stereotypes. The thing that I should point out here also is that most of us hold prejudices against various things and sometimes against various people, okay? And we should, I was going to say we should be okay with this. We should remember that this is very possible because we can absorb these prejudicial ideas as part of our socialization, okay? And so, again, we don't choose to be socialized. We don't choose to have these ideas kind of absorb into us, but we do, right? We seem to know them. And so, again, if I rewind back to the one about Jewish people and money, I don't know, I don't think I'm prejudiced that way, but I have definitely absorbed that stereotype, right? I don't know how. I don't know how I know that, but I know it, right? And so it's very easy for us to absorb stereotypes and to absorb prejudicial ideas as well. And again, society is going to tell us that that's bad, right? And so as I tell you this, you're probably all thinking to yourself, oh, that's not me, or oh, I'm not prejudiced, or oh, I would never do that, which is good. But I also want you to be open to the possibility that you can have prejudicial ideas without really realizing it if you're not careful, and you can discriminate accidentally. It's very possible to do. I have done it. I'm not proud of it, but I have done it accidentally. And so this is one of the things that we need to be comfortable with, is sometimes we behave in ways that we're not entirely conscious of or we're not really paying attention to. And that's okay, right? We just have to be open to examining our behavior and thinking about it and talking about it, right? So we don't have to, you don't have to say, oh no, now I'm a horrible person. You don't have to think that. It's okay. Yeah, so lots of people have prejudicial ideas, and what's interesting about prejudice is that sometimes a prejudicial idea will be expressed or not be expressed depending on what sort of society you live in, okay? And so depending on where and when you live, some people feel very comfortable expressing their prejudices because they believe that they are not prejudices, they believe they're actually fact. And so if you go back, I used to show a little clip of a video at this point, but I won't show it now, but I'll just describe it to you. It was a documentary. It was all in black and white, I think from the 1950s or so, and it was this white neighborhood called Levittown. And so it was a new suburb built in Kentucky, I think. Nice houses with big lawns and picket fences, like you might imagine, a real 50s suburb neighborhood, all white. Okay, and then one day, a black family moved into this neighborhood, and they interviewed a bunch of people living in the neighborhood, and some people felt very comfortable expressing their prejudice against this black family. They were concerned that property values would go down. They were concerned that there was going to be trouble of some kind. They didn't really specify what kind, but there would be trouble. That there might not be safety, and the kids shouldn't play together. And they were very comfortable expressing these ideas because they thought of them as fact, right? They thought that it was a fact that somehow black people were different than white people, and black people should not be in white neighborhoods. And so now, of course, nobody would dare go on the news and say that because it's not socially acceptable. And of course, we don't believe that black people are less than white people, right? We do not believe that. But at the time, people did believe that. They thought that was a simple fact. And so people were very comfortable going on camera saying this is what they believe. But again, it wasn't fact, it was prejudice, right? It was stereotype. But that continues to happen today. It just, the prejudice is different. And so let me suggest something to you. So our society has a prejudice towards people who are overweight, and especially if it's women who are overweight. And expressing prejudice in this way is, in many cases, acceptable. People are able to get away with it. So let's say you see, you're on the bus or you're walking down the street and you see a person walking along and they are very significantly overweight. Okay, so not just a little bit, like pretty significantly overweight. What are some of the stereotypes around people who are overweight? That what?
People stare.
People stare at them, but why do they? What do they think about those people? What, they don't like to work out.
Eat a lot.
They eat a lot.
Messy.
They're what?
Lazy.
They're lazy.
Messy.
They're messy. They're what? They're ugly. What else? They have no self-control. What else? They're unhealthy, or maybe they just don't care about their health, right? They're not very disciplined or conscientious. What else?
They might have a health problem.
They might have a health problem, it's true. What else? People might not want to sit next to them on the bus. But I think we could probably agree that there are a lot of stereotypes around people who are significantly overweight, and they are not positive, right? It's these people don't care about their health, they're lazy, they can't be bothered to eat healthy, they don't care about their health, they're lazy or they're stupid or whatever, right? We have all of these stereotypes about people who are overweight, and because of those stereotypes, some people feel very comfortable expressing those. And so this was from, this is October 2018. And so if you're familiar here, this is Cosmopolitan magazine. It's been around for a long time. Women's magazine, lots of fashion and beauty and kind of lifestyle advice. Does anyone read Cosmo? Cosmo? That's basically what it is, right? Fashion, lifestyle, yeah, beauty, stuff like that, right? So on the cover in October of 2018 was this model here, Tess Holliday. And so Tess was on the cover, and of course, intuitively we know that Tess is quite different from most of the models that we see on the cover of Cosmo, right? Because most of the models are models, and most of them are pretty slim, right? And so Tess pretty obviously is not that. She is obviously different from most of these other models. And so some people, interestingly, had a very strong reaction to seeing Tess on the cover of Cosmo. And so here's Piers Morgan's tweet here. As Britain battles an ever-worsening obesity crisis, this is the new cover of Cosmo. Apparently, we're supposed to view it as a huge step forward for body positivity. What a load of old baloney. This cover is just as dangerous and misguided as celebrating size 0 models. So here, Piers Morgan is criticizing Tess's appearance on Cosmo magazine. And why? Is Piers Morgan a guy? It is, right? Yeah. So why is he criticized? Why does he say he's criticizing her?
He's saying they're making it look good or feel good about yourself. Like, don't feel bad about yourself if you're like overweighted or because it's on a cover up.
Yeah, and so he's saying, yeah, so this is dangerous, right? This is Cosmo saying it's okay to feel good about yourself if you're overweight, right? But what are the stereotypes and prejudices that are underneath that?
They're used to seeing zero size models being covered of magazines, and like these pretty women that are like confident and all that are like size 0.
Right. So we're definitely used to seeing slim, models who are in shape be on the cover. Tess is not that, and so Piers is saying, well, it's not okay for anyone to feel good about this, right? She shouldn't feel good about her body. Why not? Well, because clearly her body is entirely her fault, right? If Tess was only more disciplined or less lazy or cared about her health a little more or maybe cared what other people thought more, if only she was doing those things, she would be in better shape. And then she would be allowed to feel good about herself, right? And then she wouldn't be criticized, right? And so here we see, Piers Morgan is kind of wrapping his criticism or wrapping his prejudice in this concern for health, right? It's like, oh, I'm just concerned for the health of the nation, so I'm going to criticize Tess here. But really, I think what Piers is doing is expressing his own prejudice about people who are overweight. He thinks he knows something about Tess, right? He thinks he knows that Tess is obviously lazy and undisciplined and doesn't care about her health or her eating habits, because if she did, she wouldn't look like this. She would look like the normal models that show up on the cover of Cosmo, right? And so Piers Morgan feels comfortable sharing this because he thinks it's fact, right? He thinks he's talking about the health of human beings. But that's not really what he's talking about, right? He is shaming her because he thinks he knows something about her, and he thinks that her body is all her fault. And it's entirely true. All of those things might be true. They might be also very not true, right? We don't know. Does anyone know anything about Tess Holliday? No, and I don't either, I will admit. I don't know anything about her beyond the fact that she's obviously a model. She's obviously on the cover of Cosmo. That's all I know. I don't know anything about her, right? And it doesn't, you don't have to look very far to see other instances of fat shaming as well. So I don't know who this dude is here, Jeffrey Miller, but he felt it was useful for him to tweet, "Dear obese PhD applicants, if you didn't have the willpower to stop eating carbs, you won't have the willpower to do a dissertation."
This guy's so stupid.
Right. So if he has someone applying to a PhD program at his university, I'm going to assume he's a professor, but I don't know for sure. I don't know who he is. And he sees that they are overweight. What's he going to think about them?
You reject them?
He'll reject them, right? Oh, they'll never make it, right? They don't have the discipline to put down the fork. They won't have the discipline to finish their PhD, right? So again, Jeffrey Miller here has a pretty clear negative prejudice, and it's based on the idea that people who are obese, we know something about them, right? We know what their character is like. We know that they're lazy and undisciplined. And again, is that true?
No.
For some people it might be, but we can't say that. We can't say that for sure. And again, people are very comfortable expressing their prejudice because they think it's fact, right? They think that they're helping people, right? So maybe if we shame people enough, they will be more disciplined and be more healthy. But again, this is not, you may disagree with me on this, but this is not about caring about people's health, right? This is about
Body shaming.
shaming people, yeah, and maybe it's ego defensive function, right? Maybe it's making Piers Morgan and Jeffrey Miller feel better about themselves by expressing their prejudice towards others and then pretending that it's, oh, I'm just concerned about people's health, right?
That happens a lot though, like in the social media world, because now, like starting, like recently, there's a lot of like models that are like overweight, and that's kind of like their brand
Yeah.
to be like confident with their body and all that. And a lot of like they have a lot of backlash, and like I don't know if you know, but there's like this singer Lizzo, and she like also gets hate because like you're telling other women to be okay being obese and all that was like not healthy.
Yeah.
A lot of people say that as like an excuse.
It's true, right? So women who are models and who are plus size, or however you want to describe it, yeah, there's a lot of backlash, and the backlash against Lizzo is very interesting because is Lizzo a model? No, what is she? She's a singer, right? So do her bodily dimensions have anything to do with her music?
No.
Well, apparently they do, right? Because people are, will stand up and loudly criticize her, even though, her body is not necessarily her product. Her voice is and her music is. But, she will be criticized. Daniel, what do you want to say?
No.
No? Oh, you were just adjusting your hat. Yeah.
If I search Ministry of Health from Belgium, because it's a Ministry of Health, but the person's really obese.
This is the Ministry of Health website
No, of Belgium.
of Belgium.
Yeah. It's supposed to be for health, but it's actually like really obese.
R-
Where is it?
Right, and so, oh,
Oh, that's like obese.
so this is kind of interesting because sometimes like you have it. We may have to talk about this a little later once I'm ready to, but sometimes we have a backlash like this. So we'll have people criticizing Tess Holliday, for instance, because she is overweight to some degree. And so Piers Morgan and others will say very mean things about her, and then other people will rush to defend her, which they should, right? She's simply on the cover of a magazine. She's not making any statement about anything at all. But then some people rush in to defend her at all costs. And so, there is a grain of truth here in that if your body is carrying excess weight, it's tough on your body, right? It's tough on your joints. It's tough on your circulatory system. Depending on your eating habits, you may develop diabetes. So there are negative health outcomes that are associated with carrying extra weight. And so that part is actually true. And so should we encourage people to be healthy? I think we should, right? Should we encourage people to eat right and to exercise? Yeah, I think that's a good idea. But again, the intent matters, right? And so here I would argue that, that sometimes people will rush in and sort of overcompensate in terms of trying to defend what's going on here, even though they should defend what's going on here. But again, I would argue that Piers Morgan isn't interested in health. Piers Morgan is expressing prejudice and maybe defending his own ego or just making himself feel better by criticizing Tess, right? And I think it's not up to me to. I don't think it's up to anyone to tell Tess Holliday or any other woman if they're allowed to feel good about their body, right? That's not Piers Morgan's job, right? So and huge. Well, I would suggest, and I might not be wrong, that every woman struggles with this, with feeling okay with her body, and so I would say it's not okay for Piers Morgan to step in and say, I'm going to be the judge of whether you can feel okay about your body or not, right? That's way out of line. But again, he's pretending that it's health, right? Oh, I'm just concerned about the health of Britain. I don't know about that. Yeah, so more memes, very easy to find. There's lots of them, right? That's kind of mean. This is a Forrest Gump meme, if anyone's seen the movie. Here's Dr. Phil. I'm going to put doctor in quotes there. Dr. Phil, if you've ever seen him, he's a psychologist who sometimes winds up on talk shows and things like that. I'm sure he never said this because lots of these quotes are misattributed. But if he did ever say this, Phil, you're supposed to help people, not shame them. So bad. Yeah, so people feel very free or able to express their prejudice when they feel that it's based in fact, right? But again, the intent matters. And so for Tess, I would say to Tess, yeah, I hope she's being healthy, right? I hope she's, active. I hope she's eating well. And I hope she feels good about her body, whatever it happens to look like. But I don't get to be the judge of that. That's for her to judge. And so, yeah, I can express my concern for her health, but it's not really my business to do so, right? Her body is not my business, right? And I don't get to say anything about that. But again, when people wrap it in a covering of, oh, I'm concerned about your health, then they feel very comfortable saying all of these mean things because they're just concerned about people's health, right? Just like decades ago in this sort of white suburb, this woman who was on camera was very, very concerned about just the safety and stability of the neighborhood and people's property values. And they were worried that, you know, there would be trouble and maybe these, you know, maybe this black family, you know, would be happier somewhere else. And it's like, yeah, maybe, but, you know, are you really concerned about the safety and happiness of this black family? Or are you just uncomfortable with this black family living in your neighborhood and you would rather it be all white people, which I think is what it was, right? So again, we have to be on guard because some prejudices are expressed very freely when people think that they are actual fact. And I would say that prejudice against obese people, particularly against women, is a prejudice that a lot of people feel very comfortable expressing, but it's not based in fact, right? It's based in, you know, ego defensive function, or just people who like being mean and shaming other people, which I don't really get, but some people are like that. Yeah, and the other thing that we should point out, and maybe this is the last thing I'll say here, the other thing we should point out is that there is a huge industry that is committed to promoting a certain image of beauty, right? Because they make money off it. They sell products from it. And so, you know, having all your makeup on, that's beautiful according to the beauty industry because they make tons of money selling, not you guys, but you ladies, cosmetics, right? So moisturizers and skin creams and makeup and lipstick and concealer and mascara and eyeliner and all of this stuff is big money. It's not cheap, that stuff, right, girls? It is not cheap. They make huge amounts of money trying to convince you that makeup is beautiful, right? And not having your makeup on, oh, don't look at me, right? Don't look at me until I have my makeup on. Same thing with, there's a huge exercise and diet industry. Huge amounts of diet products. There's weight loss pills, which of course don't work. There's Weight Watchers, which help people eat right. There's nutrition shakes and protein powders and all kinds of things that are healthy that people make money off of, right? And so there's a very active industry that is trying to convince you that this is what beauty looks like so that they can sell it to you and make, as you can see, massive amounts of money. George?
So protein powder doesn't actually work?
What's that? No, it does. It does. It does. But it's part of the health industry is why I said it. It's protein. It works like protein usually works. It's true.
It makes it faster.
It does. It's easier to consume it. Yeah.
It's easier to,
It's probably better if you eat real food,
yeah.
but it's true. Yeah. So we have all kinds of corporations investing in this idea that fat is ugly, having no makeup is ugly, you know, maybe having your hair not look like freshly spun silk, that's ugly too. And so you should buy all of our products in order to ensure that you are beautiful and that people won't shame you and people will accept you, right? Yeah, and so, but this is problematic, right? Because not everyone is built the same, right? Not everyone is going to be a size 0, and guys may or may not know this, but size 0 is tiny, right? Size 0, most women are not a size 0. Most women, I think on average, are about a size 6. Don't quote me on that. Women's dress sizes go from 0 to double zero to 16.
But I think we have more than that.
Yeah, but so I think 6 is kind of average-ish, but yeah, so 0 is tiny. Like you're a very small person, and most women cannot wear 0, right? Because they're just not built that way, right? You have a skeleton under your skin, and to some degree that determines part of the dimensions of your body, and so if you're a woman who's 5'10", you're not going to fit into a 0, right? You're just bigger than that. But the beauty industry will convince you that this narrow version of what women can be, that's what's attractive. And you should at all cost try to be that. And if you're not, then you'll just have to accept being shamed, right? And again, that's dangerous because younger and younger women are being concerned with their bodies, right? We're hearing stories of 9 and 10-year-old girls who are going on diets. 9-year-old girls don't need to go on a diet, right? They need to eat. Their bodies are growing, right? You don't need to limit your calories when you're 9, right? But nor do you need to worry about your sexual attractiveness at 9 either, right? It's too early. But again, girls are absorbing those messages anyway because they're exposed to them, even though cosmetic companies and diet companies and health companies, even though they're not selling to 9-year-old girls are,
But it's like around.
yeah, but they're,
Even though like they're not the target audience and they don't necessarily like read these magazines and all that, but it's kind of like the thing that society just kind of is okay with to have around for such a long time. So
Yeah.
people start to believe it.
yeah, you just absorb it. You absorb it anyway, right? If all the women you know are worried about their weight and constantly weighing themselves and, kind of cringing when they look at the number, that you're going to do that too, right? Even though you might be 9 years old and you don't need to worry about that right now. You don't need to worry about your body weight because you weigh, 60 pounds or whatever. You don't need to worry about that, but if everyone around you is worried, then you'll absorb that and you'll be worried as well, right? Okay, before we break here, so Kenan says, can I do something like a review the day before the quiz? I probably won't. I probably leave that to you to do. Everybody knows how they like to study, so I usually don't do it. And Daniel asks, is there a certain topic for next week's quiz? I will post that in Microsoft Teams, which classes will be covered. And
Post a slide on the
yes, all the slides are posted up to 10, I think, or maybe 11.
That's 10.
Okay, I'll post
Only one slide. The
The-
questions from the Mean Girls movie.
the from
It's the only one that I can see. Like the
Oh.
last one is only
well, that's probably all we dealt with. So yeah. Yeah, so I'll post it in Microsoft Teams, but I'll ask you anything in the lecture slides is fair game, or any question that I've asked you. So say the article that we read, I asked you the 4 functions of prejudice, I might ask you that. But I wouldn't ask you to pull like a random detail out of the article. That's not fair. So if I asked you the question before, I get to ask you again, but I won't just pull random stuff out of a reading or something like that.
Where can I find the article?
On Microsoft Teams, under Files, there's a folder of it with everything there. Okay. All right. So I'm going to post that on Microsoft Teams. Online people, I'm going to sign you off. Thank you for being here. I will see you tomorrow. Goodbye.